So I am Courtney Knowles. I do several different things, but a lot of my work is focused on mental health. And the reason I'm connected to Sloomoo is that I co-founded the Love is Louder movement with the Jed Foundation, which is a beneficiary of Sloomoo, and really an online movement about the way we feel more connected and supported and how we support our emotional health. And one of the things that I love about Sloomoo and the concept of playing with slime and this kind of resurgence of all things related to play, like people talking about how coloring and playing with slime or playing with dough or doing these tactile things help us deal with stress and anxiety, is not only that the research shows they really do help us deal with stress and anxiety, but also that they remind us of a time in childhood when we maybe were a little freer and we weren't so kind of weighed down with concerns about what other people thought about us. So I'm really just happy to be here and happy to be partnered with Sloomoo. When I was asked to talk about mental health journey, that's challenging for me because I focus so much on mental health that I kind of believe mental health is related to everything in our lives. So when we're doing well and we're thriving, that's our mental health. And we're struggling, that's our mental health. And I've talked a lot about my journey as a gay man, growing up in a very conservative, small southern town, the son of a minister, and what that was like and how I kind of coped with that. But I haven't really talked about a more recent mental health struggle that I went through. And in thinking about it, I think there's some very valuable lessons to share. So I kind of wanted to tackle that one. And like many of our mental health journeys, mine kind of starts way back in that childhood that I mentioned before we're really worried about what other people think about us, and when we are kind of in this playful, expressive mode. And I grew up in a small southern town. My dad was a Southern Baptist minister. I was a very kind of free, creative, open spirit until I reached middle school, when I started to notice or feel that I was different than a lot of the people around me, and that I wasn't, attracted to girls in the same way that the guys in my class were. And even though this wasn't that long ago, it was a time when there weren't so many examples on TV or in the media of what it was like to be like a happy, healthy LGBTQ person living in the world. And so the only messages I was getting about being gay and how I was feeling was from the church that I grew up in. And those messages were very, very kind of fear and shamed based, that it was something that was wrong with you and that you were going to go to hell. And so suddenly I went from being this kind of like carefree, expressive human to someone that became very, very concerned about what people thought of me and very kind of ashamed of this person that I was. And I chose to kind of compensate for that by trying to be infinitely helpful. Whether it was a personal relationship or a work relationship, not only did I say yes to everything, but I would volunteer for things that weren't even asked. And looking back on it, I think a lot of it was I didn't feel valuable, so I didn't feel really worthy of having these friendships or these relationships, so I constantly felt like I needed to earn it. And I've learned in talking to people that this is very common, this kind of wanting to hide something so I don't show you kind of the true side of me. I show you the side of me that I think you want to see and that I think is going to be helpful and that you're going to accept and not reject. And I did this for many, many years. And another outcome of this, which in some ways has been much more positive, is I've also been drawn to other people who are struggling. And because my struggle was mainly on the inside, I was drawn to people that were struggling on the outside, maybe because I felt a connection or compassion to them. And so over the years, I've had a lot of really close friends who have struggled with mental health issues, including my very best friend from college, Mandy. And Mandy was bipolar, and we fought a long, hard kind of struggle to get her to a place where she was in recovery and treatment. And then a few years ago, she had a setback, and after a really tough day, kind of wanted to escape and had too many drinks with her medication and ended up getting impulsive and did end up taking her life. And even though, as someone who worked in mental health, I knew rationally that there's nothing I could have done, not knowing any of this was happening from halfway across the country, there's still this kind of innate sense of failure that you somehow let somebody down. And because I had built my whole identity about being the guy that helps people and makes things right, it was really kind of devastating. And instead of doing what we tell people to do in almost all my campaigns, which is process those feelings, work through them, I did the exact opposite, which was just double down on taking on more projects around mental health, making a commitment to being an even better and more active friend, and doing more things to help people as kind of my solution for dealing with it. And very quickly, not dealing with the trauma of losing someone in that way and coping with it by taking on more started to wear down. I started to wear down and get to a point where I was so kind of anxious and stressed that I couldn't sleep. I couldn't really function. And so I started this routine of every night going in the guest bedroom and, having wine or doing whatever I needed to do to fall asleep. And then, taking all of that and using all these kind of substances to sleep, you're groggy the next day. And so then I'm taking things to be awake and using caffeine and other things to kind of stimulate my system. And if you do this over time, you just get to a point where you're just frazzled and fried. And I went from being the person who said yes to everything with no transition to be this person who just lashed out at everybody. And the smallest request, something that would have been very normal in a personal and professional relationship, I would react to just with all of this anger. And over a very short period of time, and this wasn't that long ago, maybe like a year and a half ago, I pushed the great majority of the people out of my life. Instead of having a conversation that said, hey, maybe I've been giving more than I can give right now, or maybe I haven't been asking for what I need or telling the truth about how I feel, instead of doing it in any sort of rational way, I just lashed out and let everybody know all of the things they were doing that I didn't think were fair, or that they were taking advantage of me, and pushed them away. So now not only am I dealing with all of the problems I was dealing with before, not processing the loss of my friend, I'm also doing it almost completely alone. And I have a husband and 3 dogs and a house and a job and all these things I need to take care of, and I can barely do it. And I went from a person who could handle almost anything to the smallest thing, a technology problem, a glitch at work, something that would have normally not been a big deal would send me right back into bed. And really got to the point where I was isolated from everyone. And I remember very clearly there was one day sitting in that guest room trying to consume whatever I needed to kind of shut my mind off and go to sleep, that I thought of Mandy and came to the realization that if I didn't do something, one of these nights I was going to have 1 drink too many, I was going to take 1 pill too many to help me sleep, and I was going to lose grip with reality, and I was going to become impulsive and do something that I wouldn't be able to take back. And realized that my life was important enough to me and the people in my life were important to me that I needed to do something. And so for really the first time in my life, especially a life where I've talked so much about mental health, I stopped answering the question, how are you doing, with fine every time. I started being honest about what I was feeling and how much I could handle and how much I could do. I started actually asking for what I needed for relationships and asking for help and support and finding ways to get that. And I learned, while this process was very difficult, I learned a few things going through it, and over the last year have really become important to me. And that's really what I wanted to share, is kind of those takeaways in hopes that they can help you or somebody else. And one of those is just being compassionate with yourself. And we talk a lot about how cruel this world can be and how mean people are online and at work or at school. But I really believe the person with the capacity to be the cruelest to ourselves is ourselves, and that voice in our brain, because we know how to trigger ourselves more than anybody else does. And it's been a hard journey, but an important one for me to just be able to let go. I did a lot of things during that period when I was really not coping that I regret. I treated people badly. I said things that I shouldn't have said in a way I shouldn't have said them. And I really spent a lot of time beating myself up. But you have to, in the end, forgive yourself. And the only thing that you can do is the next best thing and figure out, you know, how you can make things as right as you can going forward. And then the second piece, which I think is so important, which ties into Sloomoo and anything that we can do to kind of express ourselves or do stuff with our hands or move that get us out of our head, is make time in your day to take care of yourself. I literally went from being a person who did very little to myself to I currently do an almost ridiculous amount of self-care daily. I have so many elements of my routine that are self-care, but what I realized is while I thought I was taking care of everybody back during that time when I was spread so thin, I wasn't actually really taking care of anybody because I was such a mess. I had no capacity to be there as a friend. I could do things, but I couldn't really be present. So taking time to care for yourself. The other one is just really trusting your instinct, you know, and this comes to ourselves and the people we know. If you feel like something's different in you, that you're reacting to things differently, that you're not enjoying things that you used to do, trust your gut on that. It's better to reach out and ask for help and realize that you were just dealing with a momentary struggle and that you're okay than it is to assume and to end up in that guest room like I was, you know, kind of unable to move or to connect with people. And then the last thing, and this also kind of ties to Sloomoo and a campaign that we have that I actually talk about slime in our work here which is pressing pause anytime during our day or our life where we feel so overwhelmed and anxious that we're kind of like triggered. Because nothing we do in those moments is going to be the right choice. When we're angry or we feel insulted, firing off that email, which I did many of, is not going to help. And so just learning the art of when you feel overwhelmed, take a few minutes, step aside, take some deep breaths, play with slime, pet your puppy, let yourself calm down before you make a decision of how to react. And I think that's really, really important. So that's kind of the piece of my story, and I'm hopeful that maybe sharing this will not only help somebody else not get to that point that I did, but also remembering it will help me remember to speak up and take action before I get to that point. Because as much as mental health stories are often about hitting a rock bottom, we don't have to hit a rock bottom to start getting better. We can take action before it gets to that point. So if you're in New York City, come to Sloomoo, play with some slime, get out of your head. And if you're anywhere else, you can go to loveislouder.com and hear more stories and access resources for dealing with your mental health. So take care and see you soon.